Let's see here. Let's see if anybody joins. See if anybody is around. Totally unplanned. But let's see if anybody's around. Let's see if anybody is around. I do not know if this is totally unplanned, but I just thought I would go live and see if anybody is around and is interested in hanging out a little bit and listen to me gab a little bit. Hello. Edwin, how are you? Thank you for the blessings as always. Always pleasant. Tommy Stiggs, thank you for checking in. This is a completely unplanned telecast. I just figured I would jump on real quick, see if anybody was around, and if they were interested in listening to me talk a little bit. I usually have my ghost stories to tell on a Friday night, but I looked around and I didn't find any that really grabbed me, and I don't want to just throw out stuff that I'm not interested into. So I don't have a ghost story, but and I don't know, there's probably some drama channels happening right now, and that's where everyone is anyway. So I doubt anybody, if that's what's going on, that's where they are. And I don't subscribe to them, so I don't know if they're going live, if anybody's going live or what's going on. I have no idea. But people love the drama. We know that. So I do not, and I stick by that. So I'm just sitting here sipping an old fashioned, and thought I would talk about a little bit of a historical mystery that has always fascinated me. And maybe it does to you, maybe it doesn't. But if it does, good. I'm glad. But this particular mess, yes, Tommy, it is all garbage. Absolutely. complete garbage. And I don't understand how people really buy into it. And I know that's human nature, but whatever. It's the way it goes, right? So, but anyway, one of my most favorite times in history is the Revolutionary War period. That is the most interesting to me. The birth of this nation, the birth of concepts about individual liberty and such, which so make up what this country is today. So it's always fascinated me, and the tremendous odds that they went through to overcome this, beating Britain, which was the biggest, most powerful empire at the time, and a bunch of colonies, 13 little colonies, get together and beat them back and gain their independence. Well, it wasn't easy, obviously. There was a lot of sacrifice, a lot of hardship that went into that. And one of the worst, or one of the harshest period of time, was at the very beginning of the revolution, 1776. That winter, that 1776 winter, when when the Washington's army was camped at a Valley Forge, and it was the famous crossing of the Delaware. Everyone's heard about that, right? The famous crossing of the Delaware, where Washington crosses into New Jersey, into Trenton, and surprises the Hessians there, who were actually German mercenaries hired by the British, and accomplishes a decisive battle that was really needed at the time because things were rough, right? The Americans were not doing very well. And nobody thought that the revolution was going to succeed at that point. So this victory gave a lot of hope. But how did he accomplish this is really the question, right? And that's what the mystery is around John Honeyman. Now, John Honeyman has been credited by various sources as being the spy that gave Washington valuable information that helped him accomplish this victory. And the story goes that John Honeyman was a double agent that was working for the British and for the Americans, but that he was really an American sympathizer, and he got important information to Washington to help him surprise the Hessians and take this victory. Now, the thing about John Honeyman now, and the reason that this has always fascinated me is because this is something that's local to New Jersey. It's local to where I am now. It has always been said that Honeyman's buried, and he is buried near me. He's buried in, I think it's either in Peapack, Gladstone, or a cemetery there, or I'm trying to think what the other town is. It's one of those towns over there. It's on the border of where I live. So, and there was always rumors about his ghost haunting that cemetery. So it's always fascinated me, John Honeyman's ghost, and supposedly there's a picture out there of his ghost in the cemetery. So, anyway, so that's always fascinating me. This John Honeyman. He's painted a picture as a hero that saved the day, helped Washington beat the Hessians by giving a crucial information. But however, this is what's fascinating about the whole thing, is that it turns out that was never truly proven. Now, obviously, spies, right? There's not records of spies. There wouldn't be records of spies because there's too much risk there. So any spies that helped Washington, there wouldn't be any written record of them. So the theory is that he actually, various historians have looked into this to see if this is actually true. And what one source found is that him being a spy that helped the British is actually, it's actually a fraud. In fact, John Honeyman never helped Washington, and in fact was actually a completely British sympathizer. And In fact, his family over the years created this image of him with a bunch of lies, rewriting history basically to make him into a hero, when in fact he was a British spy conspiring with the British to against the Americans. And it's a fascinating concept when you think about it, because you're talking about a period of time more than 200, almost 250 years ago, when there aren't many records kept. So and that period of time of non-record keeping, for the most part, continues on until like the late 18th century. That's what I'm sorry, 19th century, when people really start documenting everything. A lot of the 17th 18th century is not really documented. It's a lot of word of mouth stuff. So you would be able to easily put forth and change history that way, because or during that time, because there's no official documents anywhere. Hi, Arms. Don McHugh, how are you? Thank you for stopping by. Arms, thank you for stopping by. Edwin, thank you for being here. I said hello to you before, but thanks again for being here. Appreciate it. Because, like I said, this is not a planned thing. This is just something I figured I'll go on and talk a little bit and talk about this story. So, you know, the issue with Honeyman being credited with this is the most recent theory is that it's based on his family wanting to rebuild his name, finding out that he was actually a spy for the British. They decided to rewrite history, pay off the right sources to create a document that establishes him as an American spy, when in fact he wasn't. He was actually a British spy, or at least a British sympathizer. And so the original claim is that, well, let's see, John Honeyman, he's an individual of Scottish descent. But he was born in Ireland in 1729. He was a soldier in General James Wolfe's bodyguard at the Battle of the Plains of Abraham in 1759, where the British victory eventually led to the creation of Canada. So that's talking about the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, the big conflict between Britain and England that ended up with France losing all their colonies, England taking over basically North America. So supposedly John Honeyman helped fatally wounded Wolfe, who was the general there, from the field, and got some notoriety for trying to help and save the general. The general eventually dies from his wounds, but he helped him on the battlefield. So we know that much about Honeyman. That's English documented history. So by 1775, he's living in Philadelphia. So he had emigrated to the United States, or I guess the colonies, not the United States yet, the colonies. Where he became a weaver, like a weaver and a butcher and a cattle dealer. So he's dealing in a lot of different things at that time. And he's married and he has children. And he eventually moves to New Jersey and lives in a place called Griggstown. I don't think this exists today, but at the time it was a village called Griggstown. Now, in November of 1776, as Washington's forces were retreating from New York and New Jersey into Pennsylvania, supposedly, this is the theory, Honeyman arranges a private meeting with the general at Fort Lee, meaning George Washington. He had gained access by the British general. He had gained access by brandishing a laudatory letter of introduction from Wolfe. Now, remember, he saved Wolfe, or he tried to save Wolfe on the battle. So he has a reputation, right? So he would have that letter, and it would help him get in with the current British generals because he has this letter of introduction. During the 18th century, a letter of introduction from someone important got you into places that a commoner would normally you wouldn't get. So it's very important. If he had this ability, he could get access to the top-ranking British generals. The So he has this meeting with him, and the two men decide that Honeyman was to act the part of a spy for the American cause while playing the part of a Tory, right, an English sympathizer, and quietly talking in favor of the British side of the question. In other words, Honeyman was to present himself as a loyalist while the Americans were nearby. But once Washington had departed and the British occupied the rest of New Jersey, his mission was to collaborate with the enemy and settle the army cattle and horses supplies its soldiers with beef and mutton. He was to operate behind enemy lines and travel alongside the army, leave his wife and children at home. As a camp follower, Honeyman would be in an excellent position to observe British movements, dispositions, fortifications, and logistics, plus gain advanced knowledge of the enemy's design. Right, so he's going to have access to all this information, and he could turn it over to Washington and give Washington the advantage. This is his theory. This is his family's theory on what he did. Now, Washington's movements, historians say that Washington's movements affirm that such a meeting could have taken place because Washington was based at his headquarters in White Plains, New York, between the 1st and 10th of November, and in Peekskill between the 11th and 13th of November. So ruling out Honeyman's recruitment in that period. So it could have been the beginning. He can't be in the mid-November range because he wasn't around. Washington wasn't there. So they're claiming that he was there sometime in November. So it's kind of vague. They claim he's there at the beginning of he's sometime in November. So the beginning, it's possible. Mid, it's not, because Washington is in a different location. Okay. So therefore, let's see what happens next here. Now, but however, there's no record of a meeting that Honeyman mentions with Washington's in Washington's correspondence anywhere. Now, Washington does have some record of the spies he had spoken to and dealt with, and that's documented in his journals, not by name. I mean, he had code names for all his spies, but there's no mention of this type of meeting anywhere, and during this time period. So that's another thing that kind of does away with the Honeyman story. Hi, Gina. No, there's nothing. This is just, I decided to go on. There's no planned thing here. I decided to talk about a thing that fascinated me, which is this historical mystery around this supposed spy that helped Washington, when there's a lot of evidence that says that he wasn't actually a spy for America. He was a spy for the British. So, all right. So, and the story goes that once Honeyman has gained enough of sufficient intelligence from the British, he was to venture as if by accident, and while looking for cattle, go beyond the enemy lines. Remember, he's supposed to be working with the British to provide them with cattle. He's supposed to go out and find cattle and provide it to feed the troops. That's supposed to be his cover, right? So he's maintaining his cover as a Tory sympathizer so that he wouldn't be arrested by the British. And Washington was even supposed to offer a reward for his arrest on the condition that Honeyman was captured alive and brought directly to his headquarters. Now, again, this is all Honeyman's family story. This is this is all their story, how they wrote things. They wrote everything of what went on here because there's nothing in Washington's correspondence or Washington's journals that speak to any of this. So and their story is that Washington basically, I'm sorry, Honeyman basically walked to the Delaware and pretended to be in search of his lost cattle. After some time, he is found by two American scouts, and a prolonged pursuit ensued. So basically, he runs from the American scouts. He jumps a fence. Even then, he violently resists capture because this is all part of his trickery, right? He's going to pretend to be a British sympathizer when he really isn't. Excuse me. So he's dragged directly to Washington's tent, and Honeyman continues this masquerade by theoretically trembling and casting his eyes downward and ashamed. Washington instructs his aides and guards to leave, and held a private debriefing with Honeyman before ordering the spy to be locked in the prison until morning, where he would be hanged following a court martial. Now, by a remarkable coincidence, a fire erupts in the camp that night, and Honeyman's guards left to put out the fire. And when they return, nothing seems amiss, but Honeyman escaped, right? He during this commotion with the fire, he escapes. Now, this is the story, right? The story of Honeyman's escape from prison is plainly ridiculous. This is what the modern historians are saying. It's plainly ridiculous. The entire setup for this capture inordinately complex. There is no record of any of this happening. Still, a lack of documentation in these situations is not uncommon. In fact, in the late 1776 and throughout 1777, year of the hangman for the because there were three gallows. I'm sorry, 3 sevens to gallows. I'm sorry. Hundreds of suspected Tories were rounded up and usually hanged following court-martialed. So at that time, it was going on a lot. They were finding spies, people they thought were spies, and ending up hanging them. It is therefore more than possible that Honeyman fell into the hands of the American scouts. But why? It could be that he looked willingly to alert the British patrol that the enemy troops were in the area, or that he might have been probing the American pickets for information for the British, right? Now, but once Honeyman is in Washington's camp, the general would have been most interested in quizzing him about the British positions and possibly preparations for an assault. After all, the time the Washington had been warning his senior commanders to remain vigilant against a surprise attack. So the Honeyman story advocates say that the spy for Washington intended to cross the river, but this is to misinterpret the letter. It was not sent to one commander asking him to find a spy. This is Washington's letter. And what I'm reading from is an entire document that was created by a government agency that analyzed this. Hi, Antonella. Thank you for joining. Chris Trock, good to hear you. Good to see you here. Yeah, what I'm reading from is a document that the government prepared to see. It's actually a CIA document that was prepared in 2007 that basically dispels the whole myth around John Honeyman being a spy. Now, why the CIA would do this, I don't know, but that's where it is. It's on the CIA's website. But it's funny because the Honeyman story really came to life I'm trying to figure out where it actually came from because the theory is, like I said, the theory is that it's his family. His family put this together to rebuild his name. Finding out that he was actually a British sympathizer, they wanted to paint a picture of him being a hero. And actually, in October of 1941, there was a comic book created on this that told the Honeyman's family story of him being a hero. And it was there's a digital, and there's actually, you can actually find a digital copy. It says at the Michigan State University Library. Um, a comic book that basically shows him as an unsung hero, blah blah blah, and all this stuff but it's based on the claim from the 1800s by his family. But that's the most modern record of him being the American spy. And so this whole thing about this fire happening, there's no record of a fire happening. There's no record of, that a planned court martial, his planned court martial and hanging and all that other stuff that's written by the family. So this continues on. The story continues on by the Honeyman family. That news of Honeyman's escape enrages his family's patriot neighbors in Griggstown, because it was well known there that he had gone over to the English army and that he had already received the title of Tory John Honeyman, British spy, traitor, and cutthroat, and various other disagreeable epithets, which are heard on every side, declaring that he was a bad dude. He was not something that the Americans would want. He was a spy. He was a traitor. Now there's supposedly there was a former family friend who read out a piece of parchment she had kept safely hidden upon, and what was printed on it, it says, "To the good people of New Jersey and all others whom it may concern, it is hereby ordered that the wife and children of John Honeyman of Griggstown, the notorious Tory, now within the British lines and probably acting the part of a spy, shall be and hereby are protected from all harm and annoyance from every quarter until further orders. But this furnishes no protection to Honeyman himself." And it's signed George Washington. Now, supposedly this was something that Washington issued when Honeyman went over to be this double agent, right? He's acting the British spy. So Washington wanted to protect Honeyman's family and writes this letter. Now, this supposed famous letter of Washington is the most bizarre and sensational twist in the Honeyman tale because, again, it does not exist. No such letter has turned up in Washington's papers at the Library of Congress, even though the general enjoyed a most efficient secretarial staff that retained copies of all of his correspondence, leaving his headquarters and duty fulfilled with everything there complete. If Washington did write such a letter, it could only serve as proof of Honeyman's service if one understands the words acting the part of a spy to mean in the service of Washington, an interpretation only possible if one ignores the letter's pointed exclusion of the notorious Tory Honeyman from general's protection. So when you say first of all, the letter may not even have existed because there's no record of it anywhere. This is all in an account by the family. But if you read the letter itself, the notorious Tory, now within the British lines and probably acting the part of a spy, to me, that reads as if he's acting as a spy for the British. In other words, Washington's saying he's notoriously a Tory. By now, he's acting a spy. By now, he's actually actively spying for the British, but he doesn't want his family being harmed. So the letter itself is supposed to support the fact that Washington was saying he was acting, quote unquote, a spy for him, but it doesn't logically make sense when you analyze the words. um, now, after his escape, the story continues. After his escape, Honeyman surrendered to British and entered the enemy camp, astounding guards with tales of his daring do's, and demanded to be taken to Colonel Rahl. Now, Colonel Rahl is the head, is the leader of the Hessians, right? Colonel Rahl is the leader of the Hessian troops. And after questioning with Rahl questions him after whereabouts and strengths of the Americans, Honeyman accordingly spun a tale about Washington's army being in too demoralized, accordingly, and broken to mount an attack. Upon which Rahl exclaimed that no danger was to be apprehended from that quarter for some time to come. Now, that's the basis of why they say they claim that Honeyman's a hero. Supposedly, he misled Rahl. He misled the Hessians. He threw them off the track, so to speak, threw them off the tail. It said, they're not going to attack you. They're in bad shape. They're not going to attack you. And that's supposedly why he's this hero, because he let the Hessians drop their guard, and while they did that, Washington went across the Delaware and captured the whole lot of them. Now, again, and I keep saying this, but this is as I go through this, each one, there's no shred of proof of this tale. It's hardly likely that an officer as shrewd and as experienced as Colonel Rahl would have fallen for such an obvious ruse. And in other words, it's absurd to think that this guy wanders in, supposedly escapes from the British, the Americans, escapes from the Americans, and then runs to tell him that, oh, don't worry about them. They're all demoralized. They're ready to give up. And he's just going to believe that? This is a mercenary. The Hessians were paid mercenaries. This means being a military strategist and being a military soldier was their job. This is what they did their entire life. They were hired by kingdoms to do this. Just like that's why the British hired them to come and fight this war. So it's very unlikely that they would fall for something so silly as that. Oh, he's just going to tell them Washington's army isn't a threat. So ignore them. Let's go along with that and just ignore it. Let's see. Now, regarding Honeyman's sudden disappearance after receiving Rahl. So, the story goes that he suddenly, right after that, he vanishes, right? He tells this to Rahl, and then Honeyman, knowing his ruse could not last long, once Washington crossed the Delaware, and understanding that there was little, if any, opportunity for a spy to perform his part, then vanishes until the end of the war. So he does this great deed for the American cause, and then vanishes until 1783, when he returns to his home, to the greatest hero of the hour. And the same neighbors who had once surrounded his humble dwelling and sought for to take his life in a hanging, now only surround it and praises with praise and admiration for what he has done. So that's their story, which is kind of ridiculous. Hi, TT. Thank you for stopping in. Nothing planned here. I'm just babbling about a historical mystery that I always found fascinating. So where does this story come from? So that's the story. So this hero comes in and sweeps away and vanishes until 1783. So where does the story come from? How this is this is really to me the most amazing part. How does the family go about creating this story and getting people to buy it and run with it and credit him? Because I remember when I was a kid, it was known John Honeyman. John Honeyman was the spy that helped Washington. This was a common thing. It became part of our normal history. It came part of the history. So how did this happen? Well, the story, as as I just went through, um, the it first pops up. The story first pops up in public in the aftermath of the Civil War. That's the first time this story seems to pop up. So Honeyman himself had died in August of 1822 at the age of 93. So this dude lived a long life, especially for that time period. Wow, 93 in that time period is amazing. Now, in the year 1873, in a short-lived monthly magazine named Our Home, um, and it was edited by a person by the name of A. Van Doren Honeyman, later the author of Honeyman Family History, published a long article by a person by the name of John Van Dyke, and it's entitled who is supposedly the heroic Honeyman's grandson, a three-time mayor of New Brunswick, two-time congressman, and one-time justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court. So basically, the Honeyman family had done well for itself, right? They were Supreme Court justice, a mayor of the town, a congressman. They were good. So this grandson supposedly writes this account of the spy for Washington, um, and is and it's printed in this magazine that's owned and run by another Honeyman, right? So Honeyman, the Honeyman family controls the means of production here, or the means of propaganda, uh, since they do it, right? They publish it, they make it reality. Um, so um, So the timing of Van Dyke's Our Home memoir is key because the newly reunited nation after the Civil War was preparing for the centenary celebrations of the Declaration of Independence, having both recently emerged from the bloodiest war, right? Americans were casting their minds back to those worthy days when citizens from the North and South rallied together to fight a common enemy. So people at that time are longing for unity. They're longing for rebuilding the American experience. They've had 4 years of brutal war, 600,000 dead, and they want to. People. The mindset was they're looking for this. They're looking for something to unite everybody. So they think back to the Revolution when everyone fought together for independence. So, um, Honeyman, could have easily been put up as, a hero to both Unionists and Confederates alike, right? He was because of what he did in the time period in which he did, or supposedly did what he supposedly did, I should say. Um, and yeah, so it was pretty easy for Van Dyke at that time to paint this picture of with this magazine as the Honeyman as John Honeyman as the quintessential American hero, far from being the questionable character and man of uncertain loyalties who emerges from history's dusty documents. Honeyman was, in fact, a glorious Lionheart and Washington's secret warrior with the achievements and adventures to march. So, somebody who was actually selling cattle to the British, basically, that's what he did. It's all he really did: find cattle, and sell it, and supply the British Army. Was painted by the Honeyman family to be this great secret spy that helped the American cause. Um, Now it says here that Jane was the only child of Honeyman's never to have been married. According to a contemporary description, she was tall, stately woman, large femme, badly blah blah blah. She was a dressmaker. Blah 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 blah. I don't know why that's important. Um, okay, so this, the spy, as it was called, was an enormous hit, and was a great success for the magazine. People ate it up. They loved it. They loved the story. And it also, in the process of making money, they built up this image of their ancestor to be a hero when he was in fact the opposite. And this continues, like I said, this continues all the way into the 20th century because of the lack of documentation around spies. And this article being so old, right, and so accepted. Hi, Muggsy, how you doing? So, this article being so old and so accepted at the time that it becomes a historical document, and people buy into it and say, "Okay, Honeyman was a hero." And the Honeyman family accomplishes what they say. They take a British sympathizer who basically supplied food and thing for profit to the British, and make him an American hero. But in reality, he was anything but. So to me, it's just amazing how people can manipulate history this way if the timing is just right. So in reality, there is no Honeyman. Their Honeyman was not a spy for Washington. In fact, Washington had no clue who Honeyman was, and he did not help the Americans. What he did was help the British. So it just goes to show that you can't, take everything for, you can't just accept everything. you know, there is there's a different story about everything. The reality is different than what history always says. Not always, but a lot of times it can be. I mean, it can be easily manipulated based on time and circumstance. And the power of the pen is mighty. um, so TT, you're asking if he spread misinformation. Um, did he spread misinformation to the British? I mean, well, that's their claim. That's the family's claim that Honeyman spread misinformation. In other words, that was his how he was helping the American cause by giving wrong information to the Hessians. But it doesn't make much sense because why would they believe him? Why would they believe this character? And in fact, what the supposed information that he was spreading to them, misinformation, would not have been bought by anybody who was a soldier, a professional soldier like Rawl was, who was the leader of the Hessians. So yeah, spin doctors. Yes, exactly. Right. Exactly. Early spin doctors, right? The power of the pen. And I've always wondered, my grandfather and my father always told me this. They said, and they're absolutely right on this point. They said people will believe something in writing more than they'll ever believe it in verbally. So if you put something in writing, it doesn't matter how outlandish it is, someone will believe it because it's in writing. So when they had that medium of that magazine, they created documentation that people bought into. And under the circumstances of the time period where everyone, was longing for this unity, a war-torn country, everyone bought into it and ran with it. Why not? This is a good story. It shows it harkens back to a time when all Americans were united fighting against the British for our liberty, and let's go with it. It's something to feel. It's a feel good story, so to speak. And in the meantime, the family whitewashes their ancestors' history. Now, whether now, yeah, whether his ghost still haunts the cemetery, I don't know. TT, no, they claim he worked for both sides. That's the whole story. They claim that the Honeyman family, claim that he was a double agent working for both sides, and that's how he was able to, but he was ultimately loyal to the Americans, and that's how he was able to mislead them. But yeah, they there's no evidence of it whatsoever. None. No evidence anywhere that he ever was a spy for the Americans. It's just completely from that one story that was written by a member of his family, a descendant from his family. Nothing in any of the histories of Washington's doc. In Washington, documented a lot of stuff. Him and his staff documented a lot of things. You can easily see any of them. His memoirs and his journals. You could see a lot of it, and there's no mention of this whatsoever anywhere. Um, in fact, there's a good book. If this is something that interests you, it's a short book. It's called "The Fox and the Hound," and it's a book specifically on the spying that went on for Washington. It's called "The Birth of the American Spy," the birth of American spying, "The Fox and the Hound," and it's by Donald E. Markle, Markle. Let's see, I have it right here. It's how many pages is this? Let's see. It's 250 pages, but it's not like a continuous story. It has all different chapters and it's quite interesting. It talks about codes and ciphers they used with technology, and it also identifies some of the spies, so which brings to question, how, Honeyman's not. What about Honeyman? If Honeyman was this big hero, wouldn't he be all over this? Wouldn't he be? Wouldn't he be in here somewhere in the actual memoirs? But he's not. So. But anyway, it's a fascinating time in history, and if you're into history like I am, it's certainly worth looking at. And the book is, like I said, it's not like a book where you have to read a story. It's not like 250 pages of a story. It's a book with different parts to it, and you could skip around, look at different subjects. It's a pretty nice little book to read. Um, like some of these spies in here, like some Daniel Bissell is a noted spy. There's a section on him in here. These are people that helped the American cause. And yeah. Yep. Yeah, interesting stuff. Very, very interesting stuff. In fact, they even have a chart in here that shows the how the spy structure was created. And by the way, Washington had no spies reporting to him directly. They were all through intermediaries. So the Honeyman family claim that Honeyman reported to him directly, is absurd. It just doesn't make any sense. There's all this other, I guess theoretically it's possible, right? He was the one big secret spy, but if he was such a big secret spy, why did he vanish? Why did he take off and not reappear until after the war? There would be more to him, I would think. If he was such a great spy and so close to Washington, he would have done more work for the cause, I would think. He wouldn't have just vanished after the Battle of Trenton. Oh, thank you, TT. I'm glad you find it interesting. Yeah, Gina, take a look at it. I got it. Let's see, where did I get this book? I don't know. I think I ordered it on Amazon, I think. Yeah, it wasn't expensive. It's by Fall River Press is the publisher, and it was written in 2014, or at least it was published in 2014. So it's not that old of a book. It's relatively new, relatively recent book, I would say, within the last 10 years. Yeah, so that's my story for tonight. That's my subject for tonight. Thought it was interesting. Hold on a second here. Let me see something. I didn't realize that I forgot that my camera wasn't on all this time. Here's what the book looks like. This is the Fox and the Hound book, and it's a good little read. Yeah, I mean Daniel Bissell is the actual spy, right? He's the main spy. He's the guy that did so much work for Washington. There's a whole section on him in here. He gets an honorary badge of military merit. He completes each one of his completed missions is documented. So if they documented Bissell, why wouldn't they document Honeyman? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Why would Honeyman been left out? It's just bizarre. Yeah, like here, and this. It says that in 1789, Washington needed to send an agent into New York to gather information about the British forces. He sends Bissell. Wanted to know the number of troops, future plans of attack. So I mean, you have it documented. If he was going to send Honeyman to do any of this stuff, it would be here. So it's been a while since I read this book. That's why I'm thumbing through it now. It piqued my curiosity once again. I'll have to look at it again in more depth. And here's an interesting one. Daniel Boone. We all know Daniel Boone. We know that name from history. He was a spy as well. He was a spy for the Americans. Yeah, they have actual names of the spies. They have so many of them in here. Why would Honeyman not be here? It doesn't make any sense. So, I mean, kudos to the Honeyman family for pulling off such a scam, right? That's pretty impressive. But it only goes so far, right? Until somebody eventually uncovers it. Just by logic and uncovers it. Yes, TT, there are women in here. Yes, absolutely. There are women documented in here. See, now the Battle of Trenton here is covered in here. And hold on. Now, see, It states in here local legend. They identify it as a local legend. Local legend has that a spy by the name of John Honeyman informed Washington about the Christmas celebration. However, no official record of John Honeyman is known to exist. His story is apparently an anecdote account created by an unknown author. Well, they found out who the author was. The author was a member of his family, right? So that basically explains it. That explains why it was just, his great grandson, or his grandson that wrote it. Pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty. This book is really worth having. If you have any interest in it, any interest in the Revolutionary War period, it's worth having. Worth having. I mean, I always go back and reread my books, and because there's no way you're ever going to remember everything you read, so it's always good to have as a reference, right? You go back and take a look and see what your refresh your memory as to what you had, and to me, it's a lot better than watching TV, especially the stuff that's on TV these days. Nothing really worth watching. So, yeah, I mean, here's to your point, TT, about the women spies. There, there's also there was also a major spy who was an African American by the name of James Armistead. He was originally a slave, and then he became a spy, and was very instrumental in getting to General Cornwallis. That pivotal important battle at the end of the war, Yorktown, right? And he was big at getting information. He got information for Washington through there from Cornwallis. Just keeps pretty cool stuff. What is going on here? Why does this keep getting stuck here? I'm trying to look for the more famous women. There's multiple women here that did a lot of spying. Um, it's interesting. I forgot there was a series on TV not too long ago about American spies during the Revolutionary War. It was on AMC, I believe. Yeah, have a good weekend, Gina. Thank you for stopping in. I really appreciate it. Pauline Cushman. Yes. 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 Yeah. So good stuff. We have such a rich history. I don't understand why we don't teach it. I really don't. But yeah. So that's my story. So if you're interested, find this book on Amazon. Take it. Take it home. Get it and get to reading it. The stuff that I was reading from before, like I said, is actually from an essay or a thesis written on the CIA.gov work website. So you could easily just Google John Honeyman, and that's one of the things that will come up. The actual governmental essay on the subject. Oh, you're welcome, TT. Thank you for stopping in. I appreciate everybody. This was not planned at all, so I just said, you know what, I'm bored right now, so I might as I'll just go on and see what spread some information and see who's around. That's all. So anyway, I hope everyone has a good evening and a wonderful weekend. I think the rain's going to hold off. I don't think it was supposed to rain, but I don't think it's going to. Now, at least in New Jersey. So, oh, Tony, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you liked it. I'm glad you liked it. People like this. I'm happy to do more of it. I'm already doing ghost stories. Like I said, I don't want to do a ghost story unless I like it. I don't want to just, regurgitate. Sure, Antonella, thank you for stopping in. A lot of women here tonight, all women. That's cool. A lot of times we don't see that. We just see men on here. So that's really cool to see the ladies here tonight. I'm glad you enjoyed this. Yeah, like I said, I don't like to do ghost stories unless I like the story. The story's got to be interesting. I have a whole book. I have a whole book of ghost stories here, but I don't like some of them. I've been reading them and I don't like them. I don't find them that interesting or that in depth. So I'm not going to share them unless I like them. So, but this is always a good thing to do when I have nothing else to do. Talk about historical stuff like this that's unusual. Yeah, the ghost stories are based on ghost stories are based on history, right? Because they're usually passed down by some type or the origin of them is some type of historical event or something, some reality that turns into a ghost story. So there's a wealth of them, but they got to be interesting, right? I can't just say, well, there was a ghost here, blah blah blah. You don't want to hear that. It's got to be worth listening to. At least that's how I feel. So, right, Tony. Yep, absolutely. All right, guys. Well, thank you for stopping in. I'm going to sign off. And like I said, I hope everyone has a great night and an awesome weekend. And I'll see you next time. And guys, if you want to, I don't know if you guys are interested in that Godfather discussion we're going to have. Tommy, myself, and Dean do on Sunday, 2 p.m. if you're around. If not, you can always catch the replay, but it's going to be on my channel. We're gonna start that series of going through the Godfather and talking about the cultural aspects. We're not going to talk about mob stuff, really. We're not. It's more so the underlying cultural aspects of that movie and story that we want to delve into. And so I think it'll be interesting for those, even if you're not into mob stuff, you might be interested in this from just the cultural aspect, the Italian American cultural aspect. So so tune in if you want to see that. The thumbnail's up Sunday at 2 p.m. So I'm signing off, and I want to just say thanks again for everybody for watching. Remember, press the like button, whatever. Build the guild, as always. Like I say, build the guild, and I hope to see you there on Sunday. Oh, thanks, Arms. Thank you. Have an awesome evening. If my mouse will work here, I'll be able to sign off. All right, everyone. Have a great night. Thank you so much for stopping in. Appreciate it.